Class, MASH. By a Nutty. Chapter 361, Into the Mountain. Luke P.O.V. Luke coughed as he touched the ground with Jill. Dust and sand filled his lungs immediately. The air was hot here, scalding even. A byproduct of Evan and Torokan. Luke's mouth felt dry, and he licked his lips instinctively. That turned out to be a mistake as he tasted sand and dust. Jill had the foresight to shut her mouth and just nodded at him before teleporting away. The others were treating him more coldly now, and he knew that he just had to accept it. He barely recognized himself. Shaking his head, he turned toward the depths of the mountain. The cave that dug into the mountain was plain, and it looked almost unchanged from his memory of it. There was a lot of dirt and sand in the air, and the clocks were scuffed. It was somehow familiar and different at the same time. Wrong in a way that he struggled to understand. The memories he held remembered this place as one of hope and beginnings. Luke was raised on different stories. An island of death and undeath, one that had haunted his nightmares as a kid. A place that he had once dreamt of destroying, and now he was here to make it his new home. Despite the contradiction, Luke was certain of his decision. He took a step into the cave. His shoes echoed as he walked, but that noise paled compared to the fight outside. Luke shuddered when he thought of that fight. Luke wasn't weak by any means, but he didn't have the same kind of power as Mash or Torokan. Mash was a destroyer, a being meant to change the entire world. Even that was insufficient to describe it, he was a creature meant to change the very universe itself. That frightened Luke like nothing else. The fact that Mash could fight Torokan only deepened that feeling. Mash, by his own admittance, was nothing more than a hatchling. Whatever species Mash belonged to now, it was dangerous. He could already create and destroy nations, the fight from earlier proved that much. Luke picked up the pace as another deafening sound rang throughout the island. The sound somehow reminded him of breaking bones and glass at the same time. His hair stood on end, as he turned his walk into a jog. The mountain was dark, so he buffed himself and used the light to mark his way. The cave was dark and dry, and the ground moved about from the occasional gust of wind that rushed through the tunnel. He trudged through that darkness, unsure of what might lurk in the shadows. This place had a history of killing high-leveled people, and they would be here. Not alive, but not dead either. If they caught him, he would die. Luke was not Mash, he didn't have the skills or abilities to fight a group of people. He might be hard to kill, and he hoped that would be enough. All he needed to do was find Valeria. It would be enough to just see her. A deafening roar made the mountain shake. Tiny rocks crumbled and fell from some of the walls. Luke flinched and jumped as the pattering stones startled him. He wondered why the fight outside was happening there. Shouldn't they have been transported to another place to fight? That was what typically happened when two high-level people fought. A fight like this might jeopardize more than just the island. The mountain shook again, and Luke decided it wasn't the time for a stealthy approach. Rather than try to move quietly, Luke started running. The mountain was not easy to navigate. Winding tunnels, hidden rooms, and dead ends had made him backtrack more than a few times. Each time the island shook, he felt a noose tightening around his neck. If Mash lost, then he would certainly be found. He knew for a fact that Torokan would sense his presence if the dragon hadn't done so already. Then he saw it. A single room leaked light into the otherwise dark cavern. The archway wasn't particularly large, and there was no door to stop him from entering. Luke didn't hesitate to turn the corner and dashed into the room. He froze as he saw what was inside. Almost a dozen people were in the room, each radiating a kind of power that could rival himself. Some of them even still maintained a connection to their thrones or divinities. Though he could tell that they were undead. Their presence had only earned a glance. It was the sole living person in the room that captivated his attention. Valeria sat on a throne of stone. Well, less a throne and more a simple chair. She looked small compared to all of the imposing figures standing around her. She had frozen in the same way he had. Her eyes were red and black now, like a small ruby in the night sky. Her skin had paled, and she looked thin. Despite all that, he couldn't help but find her beautiful. The fur on her ears was black like her hair, which had grown so long that it rested in long loops against the floor. She wore a simple grey robe, which clashed with what he knew of her. She had always loved embroidery and would have covered a robe like that with some picture or another. Then he saw it. The way her robes draped against her chest and pressed too deeply around her heart. Something within him clicked. The two people that were clashing within his soul snapped together. Blending as a new memory filled him. With the moment, came understanding. He saw it then. Relieved the moment of Valeria's death. Of his own death, and he knew what he had done. Luke pushed through the forest in a sprint. He cared not for the decaying of his body or the pain that pulsed within his soul. The elf had gone after Valeria, and Luke desperately charged through the forest for her. He had tried to pull the fight away from her, give her the chance to advance. As he burst through the trees, he saw his failure. Valeria rested there, her legs crossed, and her head hung down. There was a hole in her chest the size of his hand. Her heart was missing, and blood stained her dress. The world fell away, and he slid to his knees, head bowed before her. He expected rage and anger, but it didn't come. The only thing he felt was emptiness. In a moment of selfishness, he used a skill he had vowed never to use, for it was not something anyone would wish. Without touching Valeria, he passed his remaining life to her. It might not save her, there was no guarantee of it, but he still activated the skill anyways. A life for a life was a surprisingly common skill. It was selfish to want her to live without him when he could not do the same. He still did it though. As he did, he felt something else happen. He leveled and gained something. Something that activated as the last vestiges of his life left him. The world darkened. Luke gasped, the memories, the knowledge filling gaps in his mind he hadn't known was there. Luke's mind wasn't muddled anymore. The memories he had struggled to understand now felt like they belonged to him. The Luke that had been a god, and the one that stood here now were the same. His final level, his final skill had brought him back. He had come back to life. His skills and memories had been sealed away, but they had returned now. His voice was broken by tears and joy, but he squeezed out a single name. Valeria. He shouted the word, stumbling through the room in a wild run. Valeria struggled from her chair, reaching for him. Luke. Her voice was soft and quiet, nothing like the loud and violent person he remembered. That didn't matter to him. She was here and alive, and so was he. There was nothing else he could ask for. Luke struggled for words, his breath came quick and frantic as he pushed past one of the undead who had moved to stop him. He ignored the man, who was attempting to say something. Luke saw nothing but Valeria and rushed to her aside. By the time he got there, she had just risen to her feet, though her body swayed with obvious weakness. She reached out to him with one hand. It was a slow soft gesture, and it made her body sway forward. She fell forward an instant later, but he was there. He caught her outstretched and pulled her into a tight hug. Tears fell from his dirted hair as he pressed into her. He healed her, magic pouring from his body to restore her. Her soul was damaged as if it had been torn into tiny pieces and removed. That was the cause of weakness in her body rather than the missing heart. He didn't hesitate in the slightest, tearing apart his own soul to restore hers. His soul melded into hers, restoring hers at a fundamental level. Valeria weakened, delirious expression changed to one of clarity, and she pushed at him. Her words came out muffled as he hugged her more tightly. Stop. If you die again, I won't leave you, not even if you want me to. He smiled at her, his own soul would heal. That was something he hadn't had before. It was something he had earned in this life. She met his eyes searching for the truth behind them, and he smiled genuinely. The pain he felt each time he removed a piece of his own soul, could not compare to the joy that filled him. Tears continued to stream down his cheeks, and they would not stop. Valeria shook her head and used one of her sleeves to dab at his face. Nothing could stop him though. Now, after so long, he was finally back. Stop crying, you fool. A god should not weep so. Valeria's voice was broken by a sob of her own. The hole in her chest healed at last, and she returned his hug with a strength that he had not remembered. She was significantly stronger than him now, and he began to feel some pain from the hug. He ignored it and tried his best to match her strength. She was a little over a head shorter than him, and he rested his chin on her head. I have so much to tell you. Luke mumbled the words as the island shook again. This one was the largest one by far. She didn't let him go and spoke into his chest instead. Just what did you bring here? Luke hesitated a little with his response. He no longer felt as conflicted as before. He no longer felt like two people with two distinct views. That changed what he thought of Mash. A friend. Chapter 362, The Struggles of Life. Mash jumped pushing through the bubbles toward one of the people. He was strong enough now to start eliminating some of these people. The dragon would be hard to hurt, but that wasn't true of all of them. The beastman was still missing his arm. Mash doubted that he would find amidst this mess. The elf wasn't worth targeting, he honestly didn't seem to be trying very hard. Mash charged toward the only remaining target. The man who launched those invisible arrows of heat was the easiest one to track. He hardly seemed to have any defensive skills at all. His arrows were dangerous though, and he could fire them off with surprising frequency. Even Mash would need to focus to manage that much raw mana, or energy in his case. The heat man seemed to have no issues though. It was time to test how good the man's defenses were. Mash burst out of his cloud of bubbles, not too far from where the man was firing arrows. Mash could follow everyone with his domain, and this man didn't seem to have much in the way of movement skills. As soon as he burst from the cloud, he lunged at the man, thrusting his arm forward in a quick jab. The man turned a bow made of literal fire to parry his blow. Mash used his aura to suppress the magic as much as he could, and the bow fuzzed. It felt hot against his skin, but his fist passed straight through the flames. It scorched his skin a little, but it did nothing to lessen the force of his punch. His first went into the man's chest. It didn't cave in on his ribs or stop at his spine. His arm passed through the center of the man's body as though it were made of simple paper. The momentum carried Mash forward until the man's chest struck Mash's shoulder. Surprise crossed the fiery man's face, and Mash capitalized on the moment of confusion. His other hand shot forward and tore through the man in a similar way as the first. Then Mash pulled his arms apart and nearly tore the man in half. Black blood gushed from his body, drenching Mash's hands and clothes. The man went limp as his head and the right side of his body were separated from his left shoulder and arm. Mash pushed the undead man forward and turned to block an attack from Torokin. Another stream of jet black sand cut through the air. Mash crossed his arms, and wood and stone began to encase them even before the sand struck. He thought that would be enough to stop the sand. That was a costly assumption. The sand rushed through his arms and chest, tearing a hole in him just below his heart. Mash gasped and ducked to the side. The stream of sand tore through his body as he moved, but Priscilla started healing him immediately. Mash could transform, and improve his defenses with scales or something, but he didn't want to. Each and every one of his transformations had limited his skills a little. That was a hidden cost of the forms that he had never realized. Now that he was a little hesitant to just rely on the forms. This was his natural body, and he should start using it. One advantage of this body was the control it granted him. Mash's body was in its nature changeable, and Priscilla abused that fact to heal him. Rather than trying to restore the damage to his organs, Priscilla just recycled them. Pain lanced through his chest, as Priscilla destroyed and removed the damaged organs. It was like having a dozen heart attacks at the same time, and even Mash struggled with the pain. However, the pain didn't last long, and Priscilla quickly began replacing the damaged parts of his body. She grew entirely new flesh and organs with ease, his body almost seemed eager to change. Even as Mash healed, he turned toward the oncoming dragon. The archer wasn't really dead, but he probably wouldn't be able to do much in that state. Mash wasn't exactly sure how to kill an undead without destroying their body completely. Mash ignored the man for now and lifted a hand toward the dragon. His normal magic hadn't done anything to the dragon, so it was time to test Torokin's durability. Mash irresponsibly mixed a dangerous amount of magic, focusing it on the space just in front of Torokin. The dragon was over 100 paces away, and it tried to get even closer. The space between them visibly warped. Then it fuzzed in a way that made Mash feel a little dizzy. Torokin ran into the warped space, and the magic did something. Mash was expecting an explosion followed by a consuming void like last time. That didn't happen. Instead, a multicolored burst of light erupted from where Torokin made contact. The light expanded outwards and slammed into everything. A beam of pinkish blue light struck Mash and pushed him into the ground. Mash tried to push it against it but failed. It was his magic, but he couldn't stop it. The ground beneath him crunched as he pushed further and further into it. The light seeped around him and turned dirt and stone to dust. Dragon form now. Priscilla's warning saved him more organ damage. Scales hardened his skin, and his bones became sturdier. It let his body withstand the force. It still hurt, and blood seeped from between his own scales as the pressure grew to be too much. The magic was doing this to him at a distance. Torokin fared worse. Mash could see the dragon with his domain. The dragon crumpled against 5 different streams of light that pressed his body together. Bones shattered, and blood leaked from between his dragon's scales. It gushed from the dragon's mouth and eyes, in a violent stream. The elf formed a silver shield around him, but it did little to stop the light. The light pushed him along with his shield into the ground like it was doing to him. The archer's already damaged body was squashed like a bug. As soon as the light holding him down vanished, Mash lurched upward. His bones ached, and he released the dragon form to assume his natural state. His body morphed as he flew out of the hole the light had dug. The hole was enormous and deep, digging deep into the ground. The magic had only lasted a few seconds, but it terraformed the island on an enormous scale. Holes the size of buildings ripped apart the island in many different places. Water from the oceans already started filling the new caverns. Mash's attention shifted rapidly. Torokin's broken body was actually healing. The crumpled wings and bones were stretching. His cracked scales mended. Mash stared at the sight and saw the archer with his domain. He had been crushed like a bug, but even he was healing. His blood and organs were being pulled back into his body in a very disturbing sight. It almost looked like a sack that was slowly being filled. The silvery elf dug himself out of dirt and stone. He hadn't taken any real damage from the attack. His magic had shielded him somehow. The beastman was nowhere to be found. Mash turned to Torokin. He needed to trap the dragon now. Mash landed on the ground beside the dragon and molded wood and stone together to form a prison around the dragon. The dragon's body had been squished, and Mash hoped it wouldn't heal if it didn't have the space to. His feet touched the ground, and stone and wood grew from around him to encase the dragon in a crude mold. A shadow blurred across the ground, moving far faster than made sense. Mash's left arm swung around to block the beastman as he leaped from the shadow. Too slow. How was he too slow? The beastman had a skill to increase his speed, and he hadn't used it yet. That thought annoyed Mash, though he knew why someone would do it. He had a few things hidden away too. The beastman wove around Mash's hand and plunged a knife into the side of Mash's neck. It was a thin dagger that punctured through his throat. It went all the way through, the tip of the dagger appearing on the opposite side of his neck. Mash's throat filled with blood. He coughed, a burbling sound escaping his lips as blood poured out his mouth. The beastman tried to complete his strike. He tried to swing the blade to decapitate him, but Mash reacted. Mash touched the beastman's chest and pushed hard. He extended his hand outward and pushed the beastman away. The beastman skidded across the stone. With his other arm, he yanked the dagger out of his chest and saw the familiar black blade from before. Black lines spread from his neck and stopped him from healing the wound on his neck. It wouldn't kill him. Honestly, decapitation might not do it. He wouldn't permanently die ever again according to Luke, but Mash knew that he had suffered damage. A dragon's tail swept through the wooden cage. Mash jumped, dodging it narrowly. The tail left a groove in the dirt beneath him. A silvery beam of light tapered out as it struck his back. It lost most of its power and was little better than a light push when it struck. Rather than land on the ground, Mash used wind magic to give himself solid footholds in the air. He hovered there for a moment as a black blur skidded across the ground. The beast slashed with two red daggers. Mash moved and caught the man's hands. One of the daggers ran through Mash's palm, but he caught the other arm at the wrist. Mash pulled and kicked the man in the chest. His arms broke and tore free as the beastman's body fell backward. Red lines spread from his hand, wrapping around his arm and immobilizing it. It went numb and Mash felt a sharp pain every time he tried to move it. A thin arrow of superheated air burned through his side. It charred his skin, leaving a black trail through his clothes. Few things actually managed to tear his clothes, and he winced at the burn. This arrow had been the hottest one yet. Mash realized something as Torokin emerged from his half-formed cage. He couldn't win. These undead people were able to heal arbitrarily. Plus, they didn't seem to use or require mana or stamina. Mash had taken damage, and those daggers were making it harder to heal or fight. Another arrow of heat seared through his right shoulder, not that it mattered with his numb arm. Mash let out a growl of pain, that didn't quite sound right with blood in his throat. He had promised Luke that he wouldn't use his aspects, but that was only because he thought he could win. His connection to his aspects never felt so powerful as they are now, and he tugged on one. He would end this fight, or at the very least change it. Chapter 363, Aspects of Power. Mash stood on the ground, surrounded. He stood firmly, though his body ached from more than one wound. Inwardly, he apologized to Luke in case his aspect destroyed the island. Outwardly, he grinned like a mad fool, excited beyond belief to finally use his power. The connection to his aspects was deep and natural. He didn't use nearly as much energy to bring it into the world. The space above his head changed as something of pure uncontrolled power made its presence known. The aspect of change appeared differently this time. Its form seemed more solid. A rainbow orb of multicolored light, that shone with a different radiance than the sun. Instantly the world around it began to warp. The grass turned greener, while some of the trees turned to water. Mash fell at his own body and noticed nothing. The aspect's power grew more intense, and Mash saw it in his domain. While he seemed unaffected, the others were reacting. Torokan began twitching violently, his wings moving awkwardly as something about him changed. The silvery elf's body shimmered faintly as though he were fading away. In the distance the fiery archer had fallen to the ground, his eyes closed. It was the last person that gave Mash a clue about what was happening. The black-furred beastman clutched at his wounds, and Mash watched as the black blood running from his chest turned red. Mash's senses caught up with him a second later. Torokan roared behind him, a deafening screech that made the very air shake. At the same moment, the puppets Mash had created earlier vanished, not that they had been particularly useful. The aspect's glow grew brighter and brighter. It grew so bright to blind them for a moment, the whole world seemed to drown in the light. Then it vanished, leaving his eyes scored by blurry images. It disappeared as suddenly as it appeared. Mash blinked furiously, as he tried to adjust to the odd changes in the light. It didn't actually matter too much with his domain. The world around him had been changed though. Some trees had changed form, metal replaced their wooden bark. Some leaves changed from green to blue and dripped water from their ends. Other leaves were orange, and they seemed hot as the air around them shook. The black and red markings that sealed him had dissolved under the rainbow light of his aspect. Priscilla, unbothered by the sudden changes, healed him as soon as she was able. His wounds closed, though phantom pain still lingered from them. The fight had been too close, and Mash wasn't about to miss any opportunities now. Amid the confusion, Mash turned toward the silvery elf. The elf had frozen on the ground, standing with his hand mere inches from his face. It seemed like the elf was searching for something. Mash didn't give him the time to find it, rushing the elf in a quick sprint. He moved more freely as if the world itself had decided to stop impeding him. It was probably just the increases in his attributes, but it felt like something special after his aspect. The elf reacted slowly, a panicked response escaped from his lips as he took a step back. Wait! Something's wrong! The elf's yelp didn't make Mash hesitate. He struck out with a quick jab, it was much faster than before, and the elf was reacting slowly too. He aimed at the elf's shoulder, and to his surprise, managed to hit cleanly. The elf barely even reacted to the strike, and Mash's fist went straight through the man's shoulder. Bright red blood painted Mash's hand as the elf's arm was separated from his body. The elf fell to the ground as blood spurted from the wound. The elf released a pained cry, a wail like a kicked cat. Torokan roared as he tried to move, and Mash recognized the sound. The dragon was in pain. Whatever the aspect had done, it made it so that these people felt pain again, and the dragon still had plenty of broken bones. Mash realized that the dragon wasn't healing like before either. His wings remained a broken mess, and the elf too seemed unable to process the pain. The dragon's roars of pain became the call for the end of the fight. The elf crumpled to the ground, tears streamed from his eyes as he clutched at the missing arm. The beastman was bleeding on the ground unconscious in the distance, dark red blood seeped from his wounds. Only the archer remained. Mash scanned his surrounding and saw the man kneeling on the ground. It looked like he was praying for some reason. That sight made Mash pause. In that momentary pause, he felt something grab him. Ephemeral hands of strange power radiated with a weird purple light within his domain. It grabbed him like a ball and yanked him from where he stood. He was lifted from the ground and thrust through the forest. He crashed through several trees as he was pulled. The air rushed past his ears, and each impact with a tree left was followed by a loud crashing noise. Mash focused on the restraints and used his aura to drain them. The hands that gripped him were odd. They didn't restrain his physical body at all, but it had gripped him on a deeper level. Luke? That was Mash's first inclination, but the color of the mana didn't match. Either way, it only took a few seconds for him to disperse the mana. He didn't immediately look for a new enemy though. His domain let him see most of the island now, and he could see Luke and several people standing at the entrance to the mountain. They were all talking frantically, clearly surprised by something. Mash leaped over the trees and flew toward them. The rush of familiar power that came with a level up, told Mash that the fight was over. Now, he just needed to figure out what that even meant. Considering that everyone was still alive, he guessed that meant Luke succeeded. Why did he level though? Mash dove toward Luke and the others. He called out to them as he touched the ground. Well, what happened? They stared at him with obvious confusion. Luke seemed to hesitate to respond too. When he did, it was with noticeable doubt. Mash, you look different. That statement caught Mash a little off guard. He had somehow forgotten about that fact, but now that Luke brought it up, Mash really wanted to see himself in the mirror. The black and red lines from the knife earlier had already vanished. Although, there were a few more urgent things to ask about. So? I look different all the time. What happened here? Luke didn't answer right away, the girl beside him did. Mash could roughly estimate her power, and he was surprised to feel outclassed, at least as far as raw power went. Our best guess was that you brought them back to life somehow. Mash met her eyes and found that the red glow of her pupils was oddly familiar. It was like Red's eyes in the past. He assumed that she was the necromancer and hesitated. How should he talk to her? Another thought pushed its way past the question. The broken, probably dying people he had abandoned back there. We should probably go heal them then. They, will need it. Mash expected Luke to shout or something. Luke didn't, he just traded glances with the necromancer before taking off at a run. Both of them ran past Mash for a moment, but he quickly caught up and began leading them to the worst injured first. Torokin's roars meant that the dragon was probably fine. So, he led them first to the armless beastman. It was a gruesome scene. Mash hadn't really taken in the raw amount of gore his fight had produced until this very moment. The surrounding area had been torn up and littered with viscera. Some of the blood was his, but most of it belonged to the undead. Mash had torn through most of them, and black and red blood splotched on the ground around the beastman. The black-furred beastman lay with his face in the dirt surrounded by a pool of red blood. His arms were scattered to his left and right, and his chest had been caved in slightly. Luke rushed to him and began healing the man immediately. Mash half thought the person was dead, but slow rasping breaths made him think otherwise. The necromancer didn't follow Luke to the beastman, instead turning to face Mash instead. You have done quite a lot of damage to the island. She spoke while staring at the odd, and probably dangerous metal trees. Mash sent Jill a message that it was safe to arrive while replying to the necromancer. It's not my fault we didn't get moved to a safe space to fight. I wonder why. Mash hadn't really expected an answer, but the necromancer actually had one. It is because you are a monster, and you were fighting other monsters. When two undead fight, they will not be moved regardless of their level. The same is true between any of the non-human species. Mash was about to retort that it was different last time, but then he remembered he had been fighting a man. This meant that Mash would have to be extra careful when he eventually fought with a living dragon. Mash was focused on the necromancer's reply and forgot to warn her about Jill's arrival. Thus, when Jill teleported in, the necromancer attacked instinctively. The necromancer raised a hand glowing purple toward Jill. Mash grabbed the necromancer's forearm to stop her. He only managed to slow her down. She was stronger than him. That surprised him. Thankfully, the gesture was enough, and the necromancer's hand stopped glowing. Jill spoke up from behind him as she arrived. I nearly died, didn't I? Jill said the words jokingly, but a thin line of sweat slid down the side of her face. Her wing had come up to brace for the attack, but Mash wasn't sure if that would work. Either way, he had stopped it. Mash told her roughly about what happened, and it only took a few moments to gather everyone and have Luke heal them. Chapter 364, Changing Times. Mash sat with the four people he had fought, along with everyone else, and they all tried to understand what had happened. The necromancer, or Valeria, was proving to be quite knowledgeable on all things related to classes. Which, when you considered her age, made a lot of sense. She was old, very old, and so was Luke apparently. Mash still struggled to wrap his head around that one. So, you are the same person that was alive back then? You just came back and lost your memories. Luke nodded, his response was short and answered little. Something like that, though there is a bit more to my reincarnation than just that. Mash hesitated with his response but decided to just ask his question regardless. And you're okay with that, becoming someone else? It might be an offensive question, but he didn't seem to mind it. You are missing the point of the skill. I was always one person. Luke sounded more content now, and certainly looked like it with Valeria leaning against his shoulder. He was sitting on the ground, and she still leaned on him as if she lacked the strength to support herself. Which Mash knew to be untrue. He was fairly certain she was the strongest person here, and it probably wasn't close. This woman was probably a ridiculously high level considering how long she had been protecting this island. Valeria caught his glance, and she spoke up from beside Luke. "Can we move on to the more relevant topic, what do we do now, with them?" She spoke, gesturing to Torokin and the others who stood around. They were poking each other and themselves like they couldn't believe what had just happened. Mash couldn't blame them. He had revived them, a little. The little in this case being the fact they lost their levels and classes and were basically newborns. Only Torokin seemed mostly unchanged, as most of his power came from the fact that he was a dragon. The other undead had lost what was probably decades of work and effort and were now functionally useless. Especially when it came to something like defending the island. "Yeah, sorry about that. I guess you got to find some other kind of protection." Valeria waved away Mash's concern. "With you, and my restoration, I doubt we will need much more protection." Mash actually managed to stop a snarky comment, though Jill said it plainly from beside him. "Isn't that what you thought last time?" At least that was what Luke made it sound like. Valeria laughed at the response, a sound that seemed to contrast with the stories about her. Although, Mash had already assumed most of those would be false. There were probably similar stories of him going around at this point. The necromancer wasn't fazed by the question though and responded with confidence. "You are right, though I am much stronger now, and Mash here is quite an annoying enemy to make. I doubt many rulers would openly want to fight him regardless of what he does. His aspects are simply too chaotic to risk. I certainly wouldn't want to fight him. What if I lost my class? The other rulers are even bigger cowards than me." Whenever Valeria mentioned the other rulers, her eyes narrowed, and her smile grew a bit more hostile. The way she spoke, she sounded like she wanted them to try something. That statement settled the matter, and Red brought up another concern she had. "What of these now living people? Most are famous, some are considered heroes, and one is even a dragon." Valeria seemed weirdly affectionate toward Red and stared at her creepily whenever she spoke. Red noticed, and her voice sounded a bit strained now. Mash spoke to save Red from the creepy gaze. "Yeah, I told Ithas about Torokin. Ithas said someone was going to come check on it." Valeria's cat-like ears perked up at Ithas's name. "You know a dragon personally? Interesting, however I imagine that the dragons will be curious to see the validity of your skill. There has never been a skill that could bring someone back to life without serious consequences before. Normally, you just get undead, or half-undead abomination. I can tell you through experience, that tends to ruin people's lives and classes." The last part of her statement was clearly directed toward Red, who turned away at the comment. Mash wasn't sure what to think about that. Red's class wasn't that bad, was it? He thought that it sounded a little cruel and depressing, but it wasn't bad. Mash's own class had its issues, not the least of which was his long life. Mash shook his head, not wanting to worry about what he would be like in the distant future. Although the things Luke had said earlier lingered in his head. Mash would be alive long past everyone else, alone. Mash forcibly pushed those thoughts away, he couldn't dwell on that inevitability. Torokin, who was laying on the ground in his dragon form, spoke up from beside them. He was like a small hill with how his copper scales seemed to blend in with the dirt stains of the fight. "My people will not discover much. They would need to bring an ancient drake, one of the white, to look into this life." His voice was a deep rumble, and Mash realized that it sounded like the dragon was breathless. Right, the dragon along with the rest of the people were remembering how to breathe and stuff. Years of being undead had left them unable to do some basic things. Well, they would probably adjust quickly. "Your aspect is strange, how does it work exactly?" Valeria brought attention back to Mash as she eyed him carefully. Mash rolled his eyes and responded as he had done several times already. "It's change. It changes things including itself." Mash noticed several people staring at him as he made the gesture. His friends were especially focused. He had finally seen what his natural state was, and it was admittedly odd. His hair now looked bleached white, and nothing could stick to it. For all that he was covered in dirt and blood, his hair remained an unblemished white. His eyes had changed too. His irises used to be like a snake, somewhat triangular in shape. They had returned to the round shape of a human, but he appeared to lack pupils. Now, his eyes appeared like white voids placed into the deepest darkness. Like the light at the end of the tunnel, they seemed to draw people into them. Even he felt a little transfixed upon seeing them in his reflection. The strange scaly pattern to his skin, and the rainbow light that leaked from between it was almost invisible, unless the light touched it in the right way. It was something that made people look twice or thrice or more considering all the glances he was getting. Valeria sighed, her voice carrying her unsatisfaction with that response. So, you say, but you should have some idea of its limitations. Mash said nothing, and Luke moved the conversation to another matter. We must go and get the beastmen. They have been gathering for this journey, at least those willing to come here. Red and Lisa traded a look at that statement, and Lisa was the one to speak up. This island is too small. Most beastmen seem eager to find a new home and meet their new god, even if it means coming here. Even with Mash's actions. Luke, Valeria, and the black-furred beastman from before smiled. Luke shrugged, making Valeria's head bounce on his shoulder. We can make the island bigger. Or you could just go to Mash's world. Jill's comment was unnecessary. Mash had already made that suggestion several times, but Luke maintained that it was a bad idea. Although Luke wasn't alone anymore, Valeria jolted upright at the statement. What's this about another world? Mash and Jill instantly recognized the opportunity. It wasn't like Mash was trying to populate his world or anything, he just thought it would be a much easier and safer solution. Thus began a short explanation of Mash's world, and who and what currently lived in it. At the end of it all, Valeria turned to Luke and gripped his shoulders. She forced him to meet her gaze before speaking very slowly as if to a petulant child. Why would you refuse that? Jill nodded her head behind Valeria, and Luke shrunk back a little. He stammered out a response and didn't have the same confidence as before. Well, I didn't want to be in such an unstable place, and Mash himself has done something unforgivable. The way Luke avoided the statement directly made Mash sigh. He was about to explain, but Valeria didn't seem to care and snorted with her response. You mean like making an undead? Or perhaps forcibly manipulating a person's soul? Luke raised his hands placatingly. You were in a different situation. It is not the same thing. Yes, it is. Now, apologize to him and ask to use his world. Valeria wasn't listening to Luke at all. Mash was more than a little pleased to see Luke squirm under her gaze. Although, he was a little annoyed by how much Luke had changed recently. It felt like he was a different person, again. Luke turned toward Mash. The two locked gazes, and Luke spoke softly. I'm sorry. I was too harsh on you, and I'm sorry. Mash could have played it up or asked for more, but it was enough. Even after everything, Mash didn't want to lose a friend. Valeria didn't think so, and grabbed the back of Luke's head, and pushed it into the ground. Luke couldn't match her strength and in an instant was awkwardly bowing to Mash. Mash sighed loudly before responding. Yeah, it's fine. But seriously, don't do it again. Mash said that and glanced at Jill. She nodded, indicating that she wouldn't do it either. He would trust them. Valeria nodded. Now that that's out of the way, let me see this world of yours. He was about to agree but detected something at the edge of his domain. Someone was approaching the island. He couldn't make out colors, but it was clear to him that the new person was an elf. She had long pointed ears that were very recognizable. We have a visitor. Valeria rose to her feet abruptly, her hands beginning to glow with a faint purple glow. Mash called out to her quickly. Stop. I don't think they're here for a fight. Valeria didn't seem to listen, but Luke grabbed her hand and she hesitated. She seemed especially jumpy about intruders, and Mash wondered just how long she had been defending this place. It made Torokin's reaction earlier make a lot more sense. They have probably had their fair share of betrayal and lies. Red rested a hand on Mash's shoulder and asked him a quick question. How do you know? He responded just as fast. They're waving a white flag. Oh, and she's an elf. How do you know it's white? Red's next question made Mash pause. How did he know that? His domain wouldn't reveal color directly. I think it's the mana of the flag that's white. He didn't know how someone changed the color of mana, nor how this elf knew to do that, but he was interested in meeting her now. This elf had somehow known exactly how to manipulate his domain, and he wanted to know how. Chapter 365, Returned. Mash stood around and waited for the elf to approach them. She had reached the island and was now walking toward them casually, all while waving the white flag in the air. He turned his head as he noticed the black-furred beastman from earlier approaching him. The man's clothes were stained by his own blood, both black and red. He shuffled a little as he walked up to Mash, and then he bowed. It was the kind of bow that even kings wouldn't receive. The beastman bent at the waist, and then lower still until Mash could see the back of his neck. The man spoke toward the ground. "Thank you for giving me back my life." Mash was quick to stop the man. He did not want thanks for something he hadn't meant to do. "Wait, I didn't even know that would happen. It was complete chance." He felt so awkward talking to the back of someone's head and could never understand why anyone would want this. Thankfully, the man raised his head to respond. "I can breathe again. I can feel. Even as an accident, it is a greater gift than I deserve." His words were marred by the tears that streamed down his eyes. Seeing an adult like him cry like that was odd, and Mash didn't really know how to respond. The beastman wasn't the only one to show his gratitude, as the others also approached Mash and bowed or made another similar gesture. Notably, the silvery elf only tilted his head, but that alone seemed to be meaning thing for him. Mash took it all in and fidgeted awkwardly a little. Even though this wasn't the first time he received something like this, he still didn't like it. He was no god or king to want or earn gratitude. No, he was a monster, a creature bound to act on its own instincts and nothing else. His actions would have consequences good and bad, and he would need to live with them. This was just one of those, and there would be others. Accepting that eased his worries, and he stood a little straighter. Just as he accepted their gratitude now, he would accept the scorn and hatred that would soon follow. He nodded to each of them and turned toward the nearby forest as the elf woman appeared. She had just turned a corner and appeared beside a tree. Mash had been able to see her with his domain earlier, but he was not prepared for the colors that he saw now. The elf was short, only a little taller than Red was. She had long hair, that was pink at the top and blue at the ends. She wore simple, yet obviously expensive clothing. They seemed like plain white robes upon a quick glance, but a closer inspection revealed a delicate embroidery woven into the cloth, with a thread that was just barely a different color than the rest of the robe. It was so faint that he doubted many of the people here had even noticed it. She had an ageless beauty about her, and large blue eyes that were opened too widely. It seemed the innocent gaze of a child, but Mash could tell that she was anything but a child, let alone innocent. Other than her physical appearance, Mash noticed several smaller magical items on her. Earrings that radiated a gentle magic, and he could roughly guess that it was used for translation or communication. A necklace with a golden engraving that would shield her somehow, and a bracelet that would cloak and hide her from something. Her robe was magical too and would be hard like armor, though Mash bet it was inferior to his own. The final thing was a small bag that was looped over her shoulder. It appeared to be a simple brown bag, but he knew that it was likely a specially made storage item. The elf seemed to know the moment that she had caught his eye because she waved and called out to him. She needed to shout, and she did so with gusto. Too much, as her voice peaked and broke several times. "I am Fate. I'm not an enemy. I am here to help." Mash didn't recognize the name, and he glanced about, only to find that no one did. He was a little surprised at that, considering that this woman was definitely over level 200 and would probably be famous. At the very least, he expected Red to know something. Since none of them recognized the name. He stepped closer and spoke back to her. He didn't shout yet used magic to carry his voice on the wind. "And?" The elf visibly sighed in relief, her shoulders sagging as she closed the distance a little. Mash didn't know what he had done to give her such comfort. The elven woman shouted again, her voice peaking. "Wait, let me get closer." She paused and took a deep breath before continuing. "I don't want to shout." After shouting all of that, she stopped and simply watched them. Mash nodded and responded simply. "Okay." She strolled forward confidently, completely uncaring of him or the others. That was a stupid attitude to have, but he let her be. As the elf closed the distance, Mash felt several other people rise to stand behind him. Valeria and Luke rose, standing while continuing to cling to one another. Torokin didn't stand, but he raised his head and loomed over them. However, it was the silvery elf from earlier who walked up beside Mash. "Know your place." The silver-haired elf roared with noticeable anger. He stomped up to the elf and puffed his chest out arrogantly. Fate approached with utmost confidence and stood just before the elf. She spoke softly, her voice almost a whisper. "Lauren, you are a fool. I know you lost your class and levels. Mash wasn't the only one to hear that, and Valeria pushed past Luke to approach the girl. She grabbed Lauren's shoulder and shoved him backward. The difference in levels and strength between the two made that gesture a lot more violent. Lauren's shoulder crunched loudly as he was thrown backward. A pained wail filled the air for a moment until Luke healed and caught the man. Valeria ignored it and narrowed her eyes at the elf. She postured like an angry cat, her ears pressed into her hair, as she hissed a question. How do you know that? Fate didn't shake under the gaze of someone who could certainly kill him. I am the elven prophet. It's my job to know such things. And before you ask, yes, I could foresee your questions if I wanted to, but I won't. It makes talking really hard. The elf's voice was calm and collected, but if she was a prophet, then Mash could guess why. She probably knew that she wouldn't die here, and thus strutted about like it was completely safe. Valeria raised an eyebrow and stepped back. I thought you were older. How old are you, child? The elven prophet actually backed down at the comment. Her face reddened, and she turned away as if her ears hadn't also turned red. It was a telling expression. I'm, 19. Almost. Mash's eyes widened as did the others. She was almost as young as him and was actually at a higher level than him. That was more than rare. He was well aware of just how impossibly quick his growth had been. He couldn't help but ask her. How did you level that fast? Still red-faced, Fate turned to him and responded incredulously. Me? You're basically the same level, and half my age. Mash looked at her. Half your age? I'm 16 at worst, and that's if you don't consider how much I aged when I last used my aspect. I'm probably several centuries old if you do. Fate shook her head quickly. I'm not counting that, you're 16, which is basically just a kid. Mash was about to respond but stopped as he realized what he was doing. He was literally arguing like a child. Considering the fight he had had a few moments ago, and the way he had spoken to the king before, this just felt stupid. Sure, why are you here, though? Mash decided to let the subject drop and asked her directly what she wanted. Fate glanced about and hesitated. I was being serious, I'm here to help. For one, I can send some of these people home if they want. I mean like Lauren. He wasn't exactly sure if that was a good idea or not and turned to Valeria and the others. They traded glances. Most of the people here had been dead or presumed dead, and just dumping them back home might not be the best since they didn't have classes or skills anymore. And some of them wouldn't even have places to go back to. Then again, could he really know better than a prophet? Valeria answered for him. You can help those that trust you. Fate nodded and then raised a hand toward Lauren. She spoke normally. Do you accept, O fallen king of mine? Lauren stood tall, pushing aside Luke's helping hand, and sneered at the girl. Of course, send me home. I will not stay fallen for long. Fate rolled her eyes, and with a blink of an eye, Lauren vanished. Mash had felt the magic but had let it happen. Teleportation, which was very similar to Jill's. That plus foresight meant that she was basically the same as Jill. He couldn't help but wonder if that was what Jill would get next. Probably not, considering her goal. Fate turned toward the other people, and none hopped on the offer like Lauren. Mash cleared the air a bit. She just teleported him. Back home if I had to guess. Jill, who must have recognized the magic, nodded in agreement. Can we trust her? The message came from Lisa, and it made him flinch. She rarely questioned anyone, and he wondered what she saw that he didn't. Maybe he should be a bit more careful around this elf, even if she did feel weak. However, that was not as easy as it sounded. Fate, for all she was high level, didn't feel like she was all that strong, but that didn't make sense considering her age. Her class would need to be really good at killing things to level that fast. I don't know. He sent the message back as Valeria stepped between Fate and the others. Her words were cool, and her hand raised to ward her off. Sit down for now, Fate. The others said they will wait for the dragons. Dragons. Fate's voice cracked, and Mash began wondering just how prophetic she really was. Fate did something though. Her eyes turned completely white, as if her irises had dissolved. Then her eyes darted around rapidly for a few moments before they returned to normal. That was among the most creepy things Mash had ever seen, and he shuddered as Fate looked up in excitement. Chapter 366, Blue Eyes White Dragon. Mash followed Fate's gaze upward, though he hadn't detected anything within his domain yet. However, he could see what she did. A tiny white speck that he thought was just part of the clouds, moved irregularly. It grew slowly as it descended, and Mash could eventually make out the outline. Wings, a tail, and a long neck revealed the creature to be what he expected. Ithas is there too. Priscilla's message made him search the skies, and he saw another smaller speck approaching too. It circled the larger one, spiraling around it like a gnat. Mash watched them and waited. The others joined him as they caught on to what he was looking at. Once they got close enough to make out completely, Mash finally got to see the kind of dragon he wanted to. He could feel a power within the creature that could rival the aspects, and he knew that he finally met a real dragon. Well, a dragon that wasn't undead, young, or weakened. Torokan had been the closest thing to a real dragon he had ever seen, and even he had been little better than a shadow of his former self. Mash could see that now as the large white dragon entered his domain. This dragon was a being of power made manifest, and Mash could feel the touch of an element about her. It was something he hadn't been able to detect in Torokan or Ithas. This was a being of light. Not in the sense of justice or goodness but of light in its primal nature. That very light which filled the sky, which could illuminate even the darkest corners of the world. He felt that light within the dragon, radiating from her with such power. As the dragon got even closer, Mash could make out blue eyes that glowed softly with a hidden light. Her scales were white or silver, or some blend of the two, and they were just as unblemished as Ithas's scales were. The difference here was in their size. This dragon was easily bigger than Torokan, even bigger than Mash had been earlier. She was so big that she couldn't quite land perfectly on the island, and her tail splashed into the ocean in the distance. The dragon glanced down at him, her head was as big as a small castle, and her gaze was domineering as her presence. Ithas landed a moment later. She seemed small in comparison to the other dragons. My mother has come herself. She is old. Mash didn't need to be told that, but he gave Ithas a subtle nod as he waited for her mother to say or do something. She seemed content to just stand and look down at them. Was she waiting for something? Apparently, she was, because Torokan slowly rose upon his feet and dipped his whole body forward in a kind of half-bow. It was basically just a nod. That seemed enough though. Torokan, what has happened here? Her voice was deep, and her words seemed vast. His whole domain could feel them, and he felt like he would be able to hear them halfway across the world. This close to her, he felt like each word was somehow resonating with him. Torokan replied, though his voice didn't carry the same weight behind it. I have returned to life. Brought back through Mash's skill. He spoke and Mash felt it when Ithas's mother's gaze turned to him. Her blue eyes sparkled, and he felt an ephemeral pressure fall on him. And oddly, he felt like the dragon didn't like him for some reason. Mash decided to leave the talking to Torokan for the moment. Ithas's mother stared at Mash for a moment longer, then she turned back to Torokan and gave him a similar look. After a few moments, she spoke. No, not returned, but renewed. The dragon seemed content with that explanation, but it just grated on Mash's nerves. The way that Torokan nodded in understanding only made it more annoying, and he decided to try a comment. Could you explain what that means for the rest of us, please? Mash realized that a comment like that wasn't exactly polite and tried to salvage it in the end. Every other person was giving him a type of look for that comment, but he ignored it and met the dragon's gaze. It was difficult considering the size difference, and he found himself staring into a single eye. Odder was the fact that neither of them needed to blink in a traditional sense. Like the dragon, Mash had a secondary, transparent eyelid for flying and the like. The outermost eyelid was simply used when he wanted to sleep, rest, or pretend. This meant that they just sat there staring at one another for a few moments before the dragon deigned to answer his question. You are even younger than I had first felt. But yes, what you have done isn't revival, but rebirth. You have given them a new life, a fresh start, to make changes as they see fit. In a way, it is a more incredible gift than a simple revival, and yet it is less too. They have lost all that they had earned in their life, but in return, they can now hone their powers as they see fit. You gave them the opportunity to change, the freedom of it. When the dragon spoke of his aspects, she said it with clear intention. Each time she spoke a word that represented her icon, Mash felt it react to the word. He felt it too. The urge to call them out and to challenge whatever power the dragon represented. He was surprised by that feeling, and he didn't let it out. He focused on the dragon's words and thought it made sense. Torokan responded simply to the proclamation. I will grow once again. But perhaps, not here. Torokin spoke and glanced in Mash's direction with the statement. Mash raised an eyebrow, unsure what the dragon wanted. I would like to live in your world if you would allow it. Torokin caught Mash's question before he got the chance to ask it. Mash didn't hesitate and nodded. He wanted to add conditions and ask if Torokin could protect the people there, but he couldn't make the demand. His words got stuck as if they had been taken by something invisible. The touch of his aspect was rough, and he still couldn't adjust to it properly. Although, to his surprise, it was Athas's mother that spoke. Torokin will not jeopardize your world in any way. He has always been too kind for his own good, and even should he grow in power, he would never grow violent or cruel. Mash was surprised by the kind words of the dragon. It wasn't like he really knew her, but he somewhat believed that dragons would be too arrogant for comments like that. The stories and speculations of the creatures were clearly even more exaggerated than he initially thought. Mash spoke up. Wait, that's not the issue. I have no control over my world. I mean that literally, one of my aspects prevents me from doing anything controlling. The world still does change when I do though. At least that's what's happened so far. Oh, and there are people there already. They are really peaceful though. Mash couldn't make the comment he wanted to about the balance of power and how it would change with someone like Torokin. He would probably still accept the dragon, but he wanted some assurances. Yet, he couldn't ask for them directly. It seemed like any hint that he wanted a promise or equivalent from Torokin was out of the question. Thankfully, he wasn't alone, and his friends had a good idea of what he was thinking. Lisa walked up to Mash, and he nodded at her. If I may speak. Mash can't do anything to stop any of you from just conquering his world, short of killing you. Torokin, Valeria, and your people if they do go will all likely be more powerful than the inhabitants already present there. Lisa spoke, and she had chosen to revert a little to a more formal speech. She was clearly acting deferential to the dragons, which Mash couldn't fault. They were terrifying beings, and Mash was surprised to see Lisa talk in front of them. The simple fact that she could stand and talk here made her usual timidity even more odd. The dragons regarded the statement as did Valeria. Valeria spoke up. I can watch over my people easily enough, but is there anything we can do other than give you a verbal promise? It sounds like Mash's nature will stop anything more than that. This was the problem that Mash was burdened with. Valeria summed it up in that single comment. In the end, anything Mash did or decided upon would be entirely on him. On whether or not he could or couldn't trust someone. It was something he was decidedly bad at. Seeing Mash's hesitation, Luke approached and rested a hand on his shoulder. Mash turned to face him and saw a familiar expression. One of pain and uncertainty. Luke had worn a similar expression many times. They are good people. They might make mistakes, we all do, but I trust them. If they betray that trust, then the fault will be mine, not yours. Luke spoke with a soft certainty. Mash searched his face and saw his friend again. That was enough for him, and he nodded. Okay. If there was anyone Mash could trust, it was his friends, and he still considered Luke among them. He wouldn't be the one to give up on his friends. That resolve built in him. He nodded at Valeria and Torokin, who both seemed to be aware of the trust placed on them. Torokin stood a little straighter, Valeria's ears were stiff as if to show that she was listening attentively. Mash looked at her and then at everyone, that was one matter settled. Athas's mother was still here too, so Mash decided to ask the question he had held back on before. Can we fight? He spoke, turning to face Athas's mother directly. In his domain, he saw the way that Athas twitched at the comment. Several others turned to him in complete disbelief. Jill's mouth hung open, and Red was obviously trying not to look in his general direction. Lisa, Torokin, Valeria, and the black-furred beastman from before were smiling though. They either shared his desire for a good fight or were just amused by his antics. Athas's mother looked at him as if she was seeing him for the first time. Then, she laughed. The dragon's laugh was like the rumbling of a storm. Mash wasn't sure if that was a good thing or not. Chapter 367, Perspective. Mash didn't get his fight and watched as Athas's mother flew away. It was impossible to look away. The only people that weren't looking were Athas and Torokin, who seemed unimpressed. He still wanted a fight and couldn't stop feeling a little disappointed. However, he did have several things he needed to do, so this was probably for the best. The figure grew distant in the sky, and Mash turned back toward the rest of the people here. A few others had elected to get sent home by fate, but some remained. Fate herself stood around watching the group from the tree line. Mash walked over to her. "What do you want now?" While his tone was friendly, the words themselves were more direct than he intended. It might sound like he was being disrespectful, but in this case, he wasn't trying to be rude. Fate didn't seem to care though. "I want to help you guys." She sounded a bit too peppy and lackadaisical for someone of her level. That was the thing that made it hard to believe what she said. She seemed too carefree for someone who could see the future. To him, that sounded like the kind of ability that should make someone a lot more paranoid. "How did you level?" Mash couldn't stop the question, even if he knew that it was a rude one. His curiosity drove him to it. Fate seemed to be caught off guard by it, and she started fidgeting a little. A bead of sweat ran down her forehead as Mash stared at her, waiting for an answer. His gaze was definitely pressuring her, and she broke after a few seconds of awkward silence. "I pushed things mostly. Foresight plus teleportation let me kind of just cause things to die. A push here, a bit of poison there. You can kill a lot of things just by moving a little." She said it bashfully, though the words bothered him. There was a casualness to that way of thinking that he couldn't understand. When he fought or killed, it had always been a personal experience. This was something he couldn't accept, and he decided to let the matter drop instead. He nodded toward the others. "Okay, you need to convince the others to trust you, if you want to help them." She shook her head quickly, so fast that her own hair smacked against her eyes, causing her to flinch. "What? No, I meant you. I'm here to help you with your plan." Mash's instincts told him to question her, claiming that she couldn't possibly know. Then he thought better of it. He eyed her more carefully and nodded slowly. He still nodded toward the others though. "Still, I'm going to ask them." Fate smiled and took a step backward so that she could lean against a nearby tree. "Perfect. I'll wait here then." Mash turned and walked back to the others, not exactly sure what to think of Fate. An elf not much older than himself, but one that distinctly seemed off. He went to the person who tended to be the best in these situations and talked to Red. "Fate P.O.V." Fate watched Mash and let out a sigh. Sweat ran down her back, and she slid against the nearby tree to hide it. Being around him was far more terrifying than she had imagined. The dragon was amazing, but Mash was just depressing. It might have been the effects of his aura or something, but Fate couldn't stop seeing visions of death. Her own had popped up several times now. There were few people with the ability to completely shut down a teleportation skill, and Fate knew that 2 people here had that ability. She shuddered seeing her own death, but that image was quickly drowned out by a much more likely future. After getting a few more glimpses of her future, she stopped using her skill. She had been warned more than once about the dangers of keeping her skill active. All those with foresight-based skills tended to go insane at some point or another. Elves had a long memory, and she wasn't their first prophet. They had guidelines for her that had felt suffocating before. She had broken them more than a few times and leveled faster than her people had thought possible because of it. With that in mind, she still listened to some of the advice given though. Like how she should use her foresight sparingly, especially regarding herself. Looking at the others in the group, she wasn't sure which future would end up occurring. The most likely one would wind up with her getting rejected. While that was disappointing, it was also a little relieving. She shook her head slightly. That shouldn't be relieving. She came here to help them. More like she needed to be here with them. One possible future hung in the back of her mind. She looked at Mash and shuddered at the memory. "Don't think about that now." She pushed the thoughts aside. She couldn't think like that. No matter what happened here, she would find a way to change that future. Her stomach rumbled, and she remembered that she hadn't eaten anything yet. It wasn't like she didn't have food on her, but she had been so nervous that she didn't want to eat. She always felt like she would vomit when she got nervous, and no amount of levels or stats had rid her of that feeling. Now that she was fairly certain that she would live, her hunger returned. She held out a hand and teleported an apple from her storage space. This was one of the few things she needed. She couldn't imagine living without these fruits. They were a specialty of the elven forests. Each apple was about the size of her head, and its skin was a bright distinct shade of green. She dug her fingers into the bottom of the apple and pushed it to the top with her palm. The apple snapped in half cleanly, though some juice ran down her hand. She licked it before it could pass her wrist. The sourness that hit her first stung a little, as only the first taste of the day could. The sweetness that followed was just as intense but made mellow by the earlier sourness. Before the flavor could fade, she took a bite. It crunched loudly and echoed within her head with each bite. She ate slowly, watching Mash and the others stare at one another. They didn't talk verbally as far as she could tell, but their bodies moved like they were having a conversation. Even knowing that they had the ability to communicate telepathically, it was still an odd thing to see. She continued to eat the apple, taking her time with it since there wasn't much else to do. Eventually, Mash walked back over. He didn't seem hostile, but then again, he never did. Not even in the few visions she had seen of him killing her. The person in that vision looked nothing like the man approaching her now, but she couldn't help but overlap the two figures. He nodded when he got close. "You can come with us for now, but you have to keep this on you." His voice felt like it came from all around her as he spoke. It gave her the sensation that she was somehow inside of his grip. He held something to her. She stared at the object and then flinched when it moved. It was a snake with rainbow scales that shimmered in the light and a pure white beak that should have belonged to a bird. It was one of the most beautiful creatures she had ever seen, and she couldn't help but stare at it. "What is it?" She asked the question, but slowly began reaching for the snake. "Hey, I assumed you would know. This is Priscilla." Mash thought about it for a moment and turned toward the others. He shouted toward Valeria and Luke. "Luke! Tell Valeria about Priscilla." He probably didn't need to shout, but Luke nodded and began whispering into Valeria's ears. Fate wished she could hear that explanation since Mash didn't seem like he would explain anything to her. He just thrust his hand forward, and Valeria reluctantly took the snake. It moved, wrapping itself around her forearm like a piece of elaborate jewelry. She wasn't a big fan of jewelry, but this was something she could accept. "What does she do?" Priscilla sounded like a girl's name, though Fate wasn't sure how to judge a snake's gender. The fact that Mash didn't comment on it made her think she was right. "She will let you communicate with me from just about anywhere and can watch you. She can do it in both directions." Fate nodded and considered what she could do to best get on their good side. Telling them of the others was probably a good start. "Do you have more snakes? Other people will come up with the same idea as me." That comment seemed to surprise him. "Wait, others? Why?" Fate looked at him incredulously. "Mash, you are powerful. Powerful enough that most kings and gods have told their people of you. With that much attention, you will get plenty of people who want to follow you." Mash took a step away from her and spoke. His eyes narrowed as if he was straining against something. "No, you are not following me. You are doing what you want and so am I. That's all. I won't, or rather, can't accept followers." He shivered after speaking as if the very idea had disgusted him. Fate stared at him, her eyebrows crossing with confusion. Why did that idea bother him so much? Then she considered his aspects and remembered. Freedom. That would explain why the idea of followers bothered him so much. She couldn't help but glance at the snake wrapped around her arm and wonder what made that any different from a shackle. "She won't harm you. She is only there for communication, and you can remove her if you want." Seeming to notice her glances, Mash quickly amended his earlier statement. Fate nodded slowly, not quite sure she understood the nature of his aspects. Although, it seemed like he wasn't much better off than she was. "What are you, by the way? I mean, are you a god, king, or classer?" "Oh, yeah, I'm a classer. I don't want to talk about it if that's okay." This was one of the topics she had been worried about. Her secondary class was useful, but it would lose a lot of that usefulness if people knew about it. She really didn't want to share it. Mash just shrugged. "Yeah, that's fine. I mean, it's not like we are just gonna tell you about our skills either." Fate smiled a little, her shoulders sagged a little as she heard the sentence that indicated that her plan had succeeded. Even though she could really see Mash's destiny, she could look at her own and knew that Mash wouldn't kill her right this moment. She would take what she could get, and this was about as good as she imagined it could go. Chapter 368, Worldly Changes. Mash began opening the portal to his world, though he kept his attention on all the people going there. So many of them were complete strangers to him, and he really wasn't sure how they would react to the place. The last thing he wanted was to bring someone destructive somewhere else. He had already ruined the world and didn't want to repeat that mistake. However, the eager anticipation on many of their faces made him smile. Wood rose from the ground as it always did, however, the markings on it were different. They seemed more controlled, almost like some strange runic language. Rainbow light leaked from them, giving the whole archway a more magical feel. It grew until it was big enough to let them all through at once, although it only worked because the dragons had changed into their humanish forms. He wondered what the difference was about. Did it have to do with him changing his own appearance? He hoped the changes were only visual, but highly doubted it. Transformation was in his very nature, and his world would certainly change with him. Priscilla, can you reconnect with your other bodies and learn things? Priscilla didn't respond with a message, just with the feeling of acceptance. With that done, he gestured for the others to follow him through the portal. Ithas went in ahead of everyone else, already familiar with the archway and him. The others were more reluctant to enter. Luke half-dragged Valeria through the portal. The people who had been undead entered with little open concern, though Mash could see their weariness with his domain. Fate was very clearly the most hesitant, but she stepped through as well. The last to leave was Torokan, though he didn't look particularly afraid. Mash approached him as he stood unmoving. The dragon no longer looked anything like a dragon and was now a bronze-skinned beastman. An old one with a long beard, that he stroked with one hand as he stared at the mountain in the distance. Mash walked up to him, stopping beside the man, and looking at the same mountain. This had been my home, my domain my entire life. As a dragon of the land, I am bound to this place. Or at least I was until I died. Now, I don't know. The dragon spoke softly, though his voice seemed to resonate with the earth, like the kind of echoes he expected to hear within a cave. Mash stared at the mountain for a moment, then shared his thoughts. It's kind of small. Mash grinned when Torokan turned to look at him. The dragon was smiling too though and responded with an even comment. Yet it is what gave me all my power. And it was big enough to beat you. Mash looked at him and was about to respond, but Torokan stepped through the portal leaving him unable to. His words died on his lips, the protest that he had, in fact, been the winner felt childish. Sure, he might have lost had the fight dragged on as it had been, but he had been the one to win in the end. It wasn't like they could beat him after being changed by his aspect. They had lost most of the power. Mash let all those vain arguments die and just walked through the portal. That was a pointless excuse. He should have won the fight regardless of the situation, and the fact that he didn't annoy him. Those daggers the beastman used had sealed his transformations. He really needed to learn how they did that and study them. That was something for later. The world shifted around him as he stepped through the portal. He nearly fell to his knees as the dizziness struck him. Priscilla only made it worse by bombarding him with information. She held nothing back and gave him far too much information all at once. Apparently, a lot of changes had occurred in the world, many of which Priscilla hadn't mentioned on his last visit. Some of those changes were drastic, and well, things he would have liked to know before. There's no way this all happened recently. Why didn't you tell me last time? We were preoccupied with another matter, and you did not ask me for it. Mash felt hesitation in her answer and knew that she only partly believed in the words. It had probably been for the best, considering all of the things that he had to do last time, but this was still egregious. You could have told me people were getting classes. That has only begun recently. I have composed a list of the current classes and levels for you to look at. She sent him the list alongside the message. She sent more than just a list. It was a series of images and information, showing him each person and the class they had gained. Mash didn't pay all that much attention to any specific class or person but got a general idea of it. Very few people had combat skills of any kind. It seemed like a pure combat class was incredibly rare. Most people had more general classes tailored to improving their lives, like farmers and cooks. The levels these people had were also incredibly low, and they didn't gain nearly as many stats as Mash did. He looked toward the others who were looking about the place. Mash considered the best way to tell the group about the changes. And realized that every method would be annoying and probably get him yelled at. Just tell them everything you told me. Mash sent the message to Priscilla. Rather than worry about that conversation, he turned toward his portal. Sounds of exclamation and alarm began behind him. While they were distracted by that, he walked through the portal. He would go back once they had some time to talk about and process the changes. Looking around the clearing they had been in, Mash easily found a collapsed tree to sit on. He opened his storage space and began munching on some dried meat while he waited. Part of him wondered if some of those other people Fate had mentioned would arrive. They did not, and after only a few seconds, Jill appeared beside him. She stood just beside the log that he was sitting on. I would run away too. I mean, it's really embarrassing. Jill had a mischievous smile on her face, her whole body shaking a little with giggles. Mash glanced at her, unsure of what exactly she meant by that. Embarrassing. The word came out like a question, as he tried to imagine what would be so embarrassing to cause her to react like this. Jill's eyes lit up with amusement at the comment. You don't know. Priscilla didn't tell you yet. Jill's excitement made him anxious. He turned inward to Priscilla, who gave him a sense of abashment. It somehow felt like she was looking away from him. What is it? Mash really didn't want to ask, but, at the same time, he had to know. Jill grinned slyly, and he thought that she might not tell him. She couldn't resist the temptation though. Your planet is named Mashad. She struggled to even say it, as she began chuckling in the middle. Mash groaned, dropping his head in his hands. They named the world after him. For his world to be named after him was one of the most egotistical things he had ever heard of. He never even picked a name. How did it even come to this? The people agreed upon it, and you told me not to intervene in unimportant matters. Mash didn't lift his head from his hands. Jill continued to laugh beside him, she even patted him on the shoulder. You're enjoying this too much. His comment fell on deaf ears, as Jill was quick with a retort. No, I think I can still enjoy it more. Mash grumbled softly but couldn't think of anything to say. Instead, he asked her about the other information. What did they think about the other stuff? Pretty well. Valeria was weirdly happy about the classes and stuff. She even liked the name The World. Mash shuddered to think of someone genuinely enjoying that name. Jill didn't seem angry, but she wasn't the type to be bothered by stuff like this. Luke and Red were far more stressed and neither particularly enjoyed surprises. He decided it would be better to ask about them now. The others. They took it well. I think Red's finally decided to roll with the punches, and Luke just seems a lot more relaxed in general now. Honestly, it's kind of weird. Mash nodded. That was a feeling he understood all too well. Luke had been changing a lot. If it was a physical it wouldn't matter that much, but Luke's change was more drastic in a way that was unsettling. Either way, Mash was happy for Luke. Thinking about that was enough to convince him to return. The changes to his world needed to be looked at. Plus, they did have to move a lot of people there soon. His archway hadn't disappeared when he closed the portal. It remained, and Mash felt like he could reactivate it rather than make a new one. He felt connected to it like he did with all of his magic and made it open again. It responded to his desire, and the portal reappeared. A window into another place. He stepped through it, looking at the others who were still talking about the place. Torokin was the first to approach him, this time his voice was filled with a childlike wonder. What is that tree? Mash knew the tree already, but he still glanced at the tree. It seemed even bigger now if that was even possible. The top of the tree had actually surpassed the clouds, and Mash could see the clouds skid across the surface of it. There was more to it though. The tree was covered in different color splotches like a poor finger painting. The tree's leaves seemed to spread over the sky like an umbrella, and Mash wondered how far it would grow. Would the leaves eventually blot out the sun? No, that wouldn't happen. This world was enormous and even though the tree's leaves seemed bigger than mountains, it still wouldn't be enough to cover the sky. My best guess is some kind of manifestation of my power. Torokin nodded appreciatively, though his next words caused Mash to freeze. Fascinating, then what of the life form within it? Mash's reply slipped out of his mouth as he spun toward the tree. What? Chapter 369, Tree Kid. Mash, Torokin, Ithas, and Lisa went to go see what lived within the tree. The others had stayed behind and would start the moving process for any beastmen that still wanted to come. Luke, Valeria, and Jill went to tell people about the change to the plan, and what it would probably mean for anyone that wanted to move. Mash rightly believed that his presence would make things more difficult and decided to deal with his own thing. It only took them a little while to get to the tree, and it wasn't hard to sense the life Torokin had mentioned. Mash could sense it like he could anything else within his domain. The entire tree had a sense of life, a spirit, or soul as Luke would see it. Mash felt like this was closer to when he made things from his magic. It was closer to an entity of mana somewhat like Lisa was now. As his domain took in more of the tree, he noticed that the spirit he sensed wasn't the entire tree. He traced the thing with his eyes, following it as it moved through the tree toward him. It was definitely connected to the tree somehow. The creature, whatever it was, had noticed them and was approaching them too. Although, its form was completely blended in with the mana of the tree. The only way Mash could even see it was from the way the mana shifted. "It's coming!" he shouted for the benefit of the two dragons who weren't privy to his telepathic connection. Lisa shifted slightly behind him, and the mana in her body hardened slightly. Neither Torokan nor Ithas took any precautions. They just seemed excited to meet a new creature. Was it just in the nature of dragons to be unconscious? He kind of expected Torokan to be more careful considering that the dragon had already died once. Well, Mash couldn't really judge someone's arrogance. Torokan and Ithas halted just before the tree, and Mash flew up beside them. It took another second for the creature within to make itself known. "Hello. Who are you?" The voice sounded like it came from within a deep tunnel. Mash heard and understood the word, but nobody else did. The language the creature used wasn't anything any of them had ever heard before. Only Mash had an item to understand it, and he replied knowing that it would work. "We're friends. This is sort of my world." He wasn't sure if it would trust him, but it was the truth as he saw it. Mash followed the creature as it came to the edge of the tree and started to come out. It pulled the bark with it, wrapping the wood around itself like skin. It was vaguely humanoid at first, although detail only came after it had completely separated from the tree. The bark changed shape. It formed into clothes too, though it just looked like engravings on a piece of wood. Either way, the creature was boyish, and small, about as big as two fists stacked atop one another. It had a crown on its head and wore a perfect suit. To Mash, that made the creature seem even younger. It was the type of outfit that belonged to noble children who let their mothers dress them. Once the clothes and features were done, wings of pure mana sprouted from his back. They were nearly translucent and flapped quickly like a dragonfly. Finally, its face filled out, and it had the visage of a young boy that barely looked 10. Mash stared at the strange creature for a moment before remembering to speak. "What are you?" Mash asked the obvious question and waited to see what he would say. "I am Dama, the first of my kind. But more are coming." He spoke confidently with his chest puffed out to make himself seem bigger. Considering that he was barely a foot tall, the gesture just seemed cute. Mash raised an eyebrow. "Coming from where?" The boy looked at him carefully, and then back at the tree. Mash got the meaning before he spoke. "From you and mother." Mash didn't like the implication behind that statement, though he didn't get to respond as Ithas poked him. "What is he or she saying?" Ithas sounded annoyed, frustrated that she could just understand the conversation as he did. Mash looked at her and saw a similar expression on Torokan and Lisa. He sighed a little before responding. "This is Dema. Apparently, he's the first but more will come from the tree soon." Mash left out the part involving him, choosing carefully to omit any notion of him being a father. The others were satisfied with his explanation and cooed over Dema. Ithas and Torokan both approached quickly, hovering around the wooden child with obvious fascination. Dama reacted by puffing out his chest even more. When neither dragon seemed to care about the gesture, the boy turned to Mash. "Father. Who are these creatures?" Mash flinched at the form of address and quickly shook his head. "Just call me Mash, and they are dragons. Basically, just powerful and magical lizards." He added that last comment when he realized that Dama likely wouldn't understand what a dragon was. Ithas and Torokan both looked affronted, but neither rejected the description. For better or worse, it was an apt definition of a dragon. However, the child might not even know what a lizard was, so it might have fallen on deaf ears. Dama didn't say anything though, instead, he eyed the two dragons more inquisitively. Lisa tapped Mash on the shoulder and whispered behind him. "Why is he calling you father?" Mash glanced at her. He had forgotten that she had a translation item. He didn't really have a good answer. Nothing good came to mind either. Lisa smirked and then frowned. "I'm sorry, I was just kidding. I kind of got the idea. But what are you going to do?" She didn't need to apologize. Even after advancing, she had barely opened up, so he took the jab with good humor and gave her a smile in return. Honestly, just going to leave them be. Despite saying the words simply, he knew that it was his best option. Mash couldn't control people or well anything. He could kill them though, not that he would do that. However, it did leave him with limited options on most things. In this case, he would just leave Dama and his people alone. Realizing that there was nothing for Mash to do, he called out to the others. "Well, since Dama seems fine, let's go back to the others." Nobody protested, and they left. Mash started to fly away and noticed Dama following him. Mash glanced back at the small kid. "What are you doing?" Dama rested on his shoulder and smiled up at him endearingly. Mash somehow knew that it was fake. Both the smile and his words. "What me? I just thought." Mash grimaced a little, but let the little guy join. "Yeah, okay. Just remember to call me Mash." Mash wasn't sure if this was a good idea. He still didn't know anything about this creature, except for what Dama claimed. Mash wasn't sure if he could actually trust it, but it was made of an amalgamation of his own magic, so it probably wouldn't be that bad. Plus, Dama really was just a little kid. However, Mash couldn't help but think that he looked mischievous and decided to keep an eye on him. The trip back didn't take that long, and the others were already there waiting. Priscilla had told him when they had returned from speaking with the king. Now, they just needed him to open some portals to get the transfers going. Mash landed on the ground and felt Dama use some type of illusion magic. He could roughly tell from the type of mana, and the similarity to his own magic. While he never really bothered with illusions, he guessed that it was something he could do. Mash traced the little guy with his domain and watched as he tried to sneak up on Jill. Before Dama could surprise her, Jill spun and shouted. "Boo!" Dama reacted, flying backward and smacking into a nearby tree. The boy shrieked, his illusion faded. Seeing a kid of any size or kind get hurt wasn't exactly enjoyable, and even Jill had the decency to look abashed. "Oh, sorry, I didn't realize." Jill seemed to struggle with what to say, and only then seemed to realize the true nature of Dama. The boy wasn't like any creature she or anyone had ever seen before. Luke, Red, and everyone else stared at the tiny woodwork boy with curious glances. Mash saved Dama from scrutiny by introducing him. "That's Dama, he was the thing in the tree." "Thing?" Red's one-word question was accompanied by her reaching down to pick Dama. The boy saw Red and flew away from her rapidly. He screamed a childish scream while fleeing. He flew fast, stopping behind Mash's head and watching Red very carefully. "What's wrong?" Mash whispered the words to Dama. "She is touched." That had to be something to do with her skills. Red's magic bothered people, herself included, and Dama seemed more aware of it than others. Maybe he had more insight than he let on. "What do you mean by touched?" Dama gave Mash a look that said it was obvious. It was the same expression a kid would have when they were confidently telling you about an imaginary friend. "She is wrong." "She is, life and death." Mash understood very little of that. "Yeah, so am I, ends and beginnings, life and death." Mash said it like a question, prompting Dama to explain more clearly. "You are both. One and the other." "She is one. One and the other." Dama talked a little bit like a kid, but one with obvious knowledge of something. Mash wondered where Dama gained his language, but then again, maybe Mash's translation item cared more for intent than actual language. Either way, Mash didn't get the meaning. And that matters because of something. "It's naughty." Dama said it was like it was the most scandalous thing he had ever heard. And for a child as young as he was, that might very well be the case. Although, it did introduce another question. Why would you think that? Where in the world did he find someone to teach him about what was considered naughty? Mash highly doubted that he was speaking to any of the others in the world. Dama replied easily. "Mother did." "As in the tree?" Dama nodded, and that just introduced more things Mash wasn't sure about. Did the tree have a degree of sentience separate from Dama? Or did Dama have a way to communicate with the tree? And did that make a difference? Where did a tree get its moral compass? So many questions bounced around in Mash's head, and he settled on addressing none of them for the moment. He instead just turned toward Luke and Valeria. "So, portals." Chapter 370, Motions. It didn't really take long for Mash to learn what the plan was. The others had come up with some set locations to make portals, and Jill would teleport them to each location at a specific time. Not exactly a complicated plan, but Mash felt like there were a lot of issues with it. What if one location had an issue or it just took too long to move people? The answer to that was simple enough. They just weren't in a rush. Valeria put it simply. The people, her people, would understand. Nobody in their right mind would expect such a dramatic change to happen without issue or delay, and if they did, the worst they could do was leave or complain. This left Mash with relatively little to do. However, that little left him sitting in a simple chair in an empty room. He glanced at Red, who sat in another chair. She sat across from him, a large rectangular table separating them like a river. A single dim light lit the windowless room, and visibly enchanted bricks marred the walls. Each reddish stone was covered with tiny blue engravings that radiated with faint magical power. Red had a book out and was reading something. Mash spoke to get her attention. "How long are we supposed to wait here?" Red didn't look up from her book, as she responded. "You would know before me. We've barely even been here 5 minutes." "I know that, but..." His voice trailed off. Red glanced up from her book and eyed him. Her grey skin and empty face made it really hard to get anything from her expressions. The flat tone with which she responded made her feelings known. "But you're worried?" "I couldn't tell. Just ask Priscilla, if you're really that worried." "I did, but now she's refusing." Mash slumped forward in his chair, his arms sprawled across the table. Red didn't bother responding. Instead, she just lifted the book off the table and avoided Mash completely. He sighed but didn't bother her anymore. He had mostly just been doing it to pass the time. She was right, he would know anything before her. His domain extends far beyond the walls, so he should be able to spot anyone long before they arrive. After so much time with Jill, he had even got the knack for sensing when someone was teleporting. That was why, after a few minutes, he felt when someone appeared in the hallway just outside of the room. Mash debated telling Red, but she somehow noticed and was putting the book away. She looked toward the door, and Mash could sense some tension in her. Why was she so worried? Mash knew who was behind the door even before they entered, and Mash didn't see the reason. General Urkish, his brother, and the king were there, but Mash had already engaged with them before. There was only one new person with them, and they were low level. They didn't bother knocking, entering the room in a simple line. Urkish entered first. She wore an obviously enchanted set of leather armor. It seemed high quality. Was she dressed for a fight? Just what exactly did the king have planned for this? The others had said that the king had just wanted to talk to Mash, to ensure that he didn't do anything untoward to the beastmen to coerce them. It was a simple enough condition, so they hadn't really thought to reject it. With how heavily prepared Urkish was, it seemed like the king thought that this wouldn't end simply. The king himself walked in after Urkish. He was dressed more casually than Mash had imagined, only wearing a simple tunic and trousers that weren't even magical. Arthur was quick to follow and nod toward Mash. He wore a full set of bluish-green armor and carried a helmet under one of his arms. Mash nodded toward him, but Arthur only grimaced in response. That gesture, more than Urkish's armor and Red's worry, made him think that this was a trap. Lastly, came the one person Mash didn't recognize. It was a young man only a little older than Mash himself. The man had angular features and narrow dark brown eyes that made him seem perpetually angry. Or maybe he was genuinely angry for some reason. Mash didn't know the guy, but that didn't mean the opposite was true. Mash had made many friends and enemies, fate had practically promised him that. The man sniffed slightly and ran a hand through his hair. Though his hair was matted to his head with grease and gel, the gesture left his hand shining. Mash wouldn't shake his hand, and a glance at Red made him think she wouldn't either. Mash and Red had taken the seats at the ends of the table. There were exactly enough seats to fit them all, but it was clearly designed for the two opposing sides to sit opposite one another. They had broken that idea already. The king looked at Red and Mash as if expecting one of them to move to let him take one of those seats. After a few awkward seconds, he sighed and took a seat beside Red. Urkish sat beside him, which put her next to Mash. Arthur took the seat across from Urkish, and the final guy sat in the only remaining seat. He hadn't taken his eyes off Mash since entering the room, but Mash didn't give him the same attention. The man was low level, not even 100, so Mash was more focused on Urkish, who he was sure was the strongest among them. Although, the king arrested attention by speaking first. "Hello, Mash. I heard you caused another ruckus." Mash waved away the comment. "It wasn't anything important, Your Majesty." Mash ended up phrasing that more like a question. How should he address the king? Even though Mash was no longer one of the king's subjects, it felt weird to treat him in any other way. The king chuckled slightly. "Yes, of course. Sending the Elven Kingdom into panic is not very important. And you may call me Lex. The other rulers refer to me that way, and you are at least their equal." That idea made Mash a little uncomfortable. It was just so unusual to treat the king, his king, so casually. Although, with their past few interactions in mind, he was probably right. There was no point in showing him fake respect considering the antagonistic nature of their relationship. Mash was a king killer, his aspects practically promised him that. Mash did the only thing he could and agreed. Sure. Who is that though? The king smiled, a completely self-satisfied expression on his face, as he introduced the man. This is our new mediator. His name is Walter, and he will discuss a few things with you. The king nodded to Walter. Go ahead, Walt. The man bowed his head slightly, before sucking in a sharp breath and standing. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak here, Your Highness. I will strive to meet your expectations. Walt gave another bow before turning toward Mash and then read. He didn't say anything and just kept glancing between the two of them. Annoyed, Mash was about to tell him to get on with it, but he spoke before Mash could get a word out. It was intentional. That realization frustrated Mash, but he had enough emotional control to relax. Walter was picked for this by the king, so he was probably not just trying to be annoying. Well, we have a few things we must get through today, so let us start with the simplest, the matter of your nationality and familial ties. Elenia Venfer, your father's household has officially disowned you. Although, your mother's house has offered you their name. The king, though, is willing to grant you your name and title if you would agree to represent the kingdom in future engagements. Walter spoke as if those words were common. He said it with little emotion, and yet he was talking about a father abandoning their child. Mash had little desire to be with his parents, but Red still interacted with her family. Although, he wasn't sure if this was a bad thing. Red's father was vile. When he thought of it that way, he kind of expected Red to feel some kind of relief or freedom. Her face and aura didn't portray that emotion though. Mash could see, and more importantly, feel the pain in her aura. It leaked out of her more profoundly than he had ever seen before. Even Walter had stopped talking to watch. The space around Red was somehow dimmer than everywhere else in the room. Red. Mash called out to her and said nothing else. What should he even say? Even if he told her that her family didn't matter, it wasn't the kind of decision he could make for her. She had to decide for herself what kind of relationship she wanted with her father. However, he did manage to shake her from her stupor. The aura around her winked out, and she spoke calmly. Though, after seeing that aura, her normal tone felt eerie. That is fine. I will take my mother's name, though that is not a discussion for now. Walter was smart enough to not press the matter and just moved on. I will the matter in your hands. Now, on to a similar problem for Mash. You are no longer a member of the Stellumbra household. Regardless of what your brother here might insinuate, that name is something tied to the kingdom. You are no longer a citizen and are very much, and the king cannot have anything connecting you to the kingdom. Walter stopped talking and just looked at him carefully. He was obviously waiting for Mash to react or say something. But Mash didn't care. He had known something like this was likely and even supported the decision. Plus, his family would be safer if he didn't share their last name. That was the logic he used to push any other thought from his mind. It's just a name. Mash shrugged and ended the subject just like that. Arthur's grimace turned into a frown, and he cut in before Walter could move on. That's the same thing Luna said. Mash, no matter what the king says, neither Luna nor I will hide who you are. We are not ashamed of you. Arthur met Mash's gaze, and the honesty in his eyes was clear. It was reassuring, silencing those intrusive thoughts that told him otherwise. Mash smiled at his brother, knowing that he must have fought the king about it. However, Arthur wouldn't abandon his duties or his home. I know. You don't need to tell me. Mash meant that. He trusted Arthur, and that was enough for him. They were family even if their names changed. Walter cut in by clearing his throat loudly. Since we are all in agreement here, let us move on to the next matter. That of your role in this encounter and future ones.